They said the Alpha King felt nothing. Lainey knew the truth. She'd spent 3 years as royal physician to King Lucas of the Hancock realm, close enough to take his pulse, to monitor his breathing, to catalogue every physical response his body made. And she'd hidden something far more dangerous than her medical observations. She'd hidden her fantasy about being the one to make him feel again. In the Hancock realm, emotion was weakness. After the feral wars had torn through the territories, alphas losing control to madness, entire packs destroyed by unrestrained instinct, the survivors had learned a brutal lesson. Logic ruled, restraint protected, and feelings got people killed. King Lucas embodied that philosophy perfectly. For 8 years since he'd taken the throne at 19, he'd ruled with absolute emotional detachment. No rage. No joy, no fear. The court called him the Frozen King, and they meant it as the highest compliment. Lainey served as his personal physician, monitoring the health of a king who never seemed to actually be present in his own body. Professional, distant, necessary but never truly seen. Perfect for an Omega who had learned that caring about anything meant risking the agony of loss. No one knew she spent her nights in the healing gardens, talking to plants because they were safe to care about, imagining what it would be like to see ice crack in those glacier blue eyes. No one knew her darkest fantasy wasn't about dominance or submission. It was about mattering enough to someone that they'd risk feeling for her. But on the autumn equinox, when Lucas collapsed during the harvest ceremony, with frost spreading across his skin like death itself, Lainey realized something terrifying. Her fantasy was about to cost them both everything. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. The first thing Lainey noticed was the silence. The harvest ceremony should have been thunderous. Drums and celebration, pack members from across the realm gathered to honor the season's abundance. Instead, unnatural quiet pressed against her eardrums as she pushed through the frozen crowd. They stood like statues in the great hall, their breath misting in air that had gone winter cold, despite the hearth fires blazing on every wall. And at the center, collapsed on the dais, lay King Lucas. Lainey's healer instincts overrode everything else. She was moving before her mind caught up. Medical bag already in hand, pushing past guards who'd forgotten how to move in the strange cold. "Your Majesty." She dropped to her knees beside him, hands already reaching for his throat to check his pulse. His skin was ice, not cold, ice. Literally crystallizing beneath her fingertips, spreading in delicate fractals up his neck toward his jaw. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, and dark veins spiderwebbed beneath his skin like cracks in frozen glass. "Everyone out," Lainey commanded, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. "Now." "The king," Commander Thorne started, "is my patient, and I'm ordering this room cleared. Unless you'd like to explain to the court why you delayed medical treatment." Lainey didn't wait for response. She was already assessing, pulse thread but present, temperature dangerously low. Pupils responsive when she forced his eyelids open. This wasn't illness. This was something else entirely. The hall emptied slowly, reluctantly. Lainey barely noticed. She was too focused on the way the frost continued spreading across Lucas's skin, too focused on the wrongness of it. In 3 years of monitoring his health, she'd never seen anything like this. "You're killing yourself," she whispered, not expecting an answer. Lucas's eyes snapped open. For one heartbeat, Lainey saw something in those glacier blue depths. Not emptiness, but everything. Pain and fury and desperate, crushing loneliness compressed into a single moment of absolute clarity. Then it was gone. Shut down. Locked away behind walls so thick She could practically see them rebuilding. "Help me up," he said, his voice rough but emotionless. "You collapsed. You're hypothermic despite standing beside a fire. There are dark veins spreading across your—" "I said help me up." It was the same tone he used for everything, flat, commanding, completely devoid of feeling. But Laney's hands were still on his throat, still feeling his pulse, and she felt the lie in it. His heart was racing, panicked, terrified. He just refused to let it show. "No," Laney said quietly. Lucas's eyes sharpened on her face. "That wasn't a request. And this isn't a negotiation. You're my patient. I'm your physician. And I'm telling you that standing right now could kill you." She kept her voice calm, professional, even as her own pulse thundered. "So you can either let me treat you here, or we can relocate to the medical wing where I have proper equipment. Choose." For a long moment, Lucas simply stared at her. Laney had the unsettling feeling he was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time in 3 years. Not as a function, but as a person who'd just refused him. "The medical wing," he said finally, "but tell no one what you saw. The entire court saw you collapse with frost spreading across your skin. I can't exactly hide. Tell them it was exhaustion, overwork, anything but the truth." "And what is the truth?" Lucas's jaw tightened, the only emotional tell he ever gave. "That I'm losing." He didn't elaborate, just pushed himself to sitting with visible effort, accepting Laney's arm for support, with the kind of reluctance that suggested he'd rather collapse again than show weakness. They made it to the medical wing through servant passages, avoiding the court's prying eyes. By the time Laney had Lucas settled on the examination table, the frost had receded, but the dark veins remained, pulsing faintly beneath his too pale skin. "How long has this been happening?" Laney asked, gathering supplies. "Irrelevant. It's extremely relevant. These veins suggest progressive deterioration of—" "I'm aware what they suggest." Lucas's voice remained flat. "I'm also aware you're the first physician observant enough to notice them." Laney's hands stilled. "You've been hiding this from everyone. For how long?" 8 years. The number hit her like a physical blow. 8 years. Since the day he'd taken the throne. Since the day he'd— "You killed your father," Laney said quietly. It wasn't a question. Everyone knew the story. Alpha King Marcus had gone feral during the final battle of the Feral Wars. His own son had ended him to save the realm. And this started then. Yes. What is it? For the first time since waking, genuine emotion flickered across Lucas's face. Not much, just a tightening around his eyes, a slight downturn to his mouth. But after 8 years of perfect emotional control, even that much was devastating. "A curse," he said, "or a punishment. I've never been entirely sure which." Laney stepped closer, professional concern overriding caution. "Explain." "The Feral Wars were stopped through a binding, ancient magic that sealed away the madness, prevented it from spreading. But the magic requires—" He paused as if the words cost him something. "Balance. Alphas lost control, became all feeling and no thought. The binding demands the opposite, perfect control, perfect emotional suppression." "You're the anchor," Laney realized with dawning horror. "The entire binding is tied to you, to your ability to feel nothing." "Yes. And if you feel—" "The binding weakens, the madness returns, the feral wars begin again, and every pack in the realm falls to instinct and chaos." Lucas met her eyes. "That's the truth you'll hide. Because if the court discovers I'm failing, they'll execute me and find a new anchor before the binding breaks completely." The weight of it settled over Laney like frost. 8 years of carrying the realm's sanity. 8 years of killing every emotion just to keep others safe. 8 years of being called the Frozen King, while slowly dying inside. "There has to be another way," she whispered. "There isn't. I've looked." Something almost like resignation crossed Lucas's features. "The curse is accelerating. I have maybe months before it consumes me entirely. And when it does, I'll die exactly like my father, frozen from the inside out, killed by the very thing that was supposed to save me." Lainey stared at the man she'd secretly fantasized about for 3 years. The one she'd imagined breaking through to, making feel again. And she finally understood why her fantasy had always felt so dangerous. Because making King Lucas feel wouldn't just crack his walls. It would destroy the entire realm. Lainey didn't sleep that night. She sat in the medical wing's research library, surrounded by texts on ancient magic and binding curses, searching for something, anything, that might offer an alternative to watching Lucas slowly freeze to death. Every source confirmed what he'd told her. The feral binding required absolute emotional suppression from its anchor. Feel too much. And the madness leaked back into the world. Feel nothing long enough, and the binding consumed you instead. A death sentence wrapped in duty. "You're still here." Lainey looked up to find Lucas in the doorway, dressed in simple training leathers instead of his formal armor. Without the crown and regalia, he looked younger, less like the Frozen King and more like the 19-year-old who'd been forced to kill his own father. "I'm researching treatment options," she said, gesturing to the text spread across her workspace. "There are none." Lucas crossed to examine the books she'd pulled. "I've read them all, multiple times. The binding is absolute." "Nothing is absolute. Magic has rules. Rules can be broken." Lucas's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if he remembered how. "I've spent 8 years trying to break them. All I've accomplished is accelerating my own demise." Lainey stood, moving to block his view of the research. "Then we change approach. Stop trying to break the binding. Start treating the symptoms instead." "You can't treat frost spreading through my veins." "I can slow it down. Herbal compounds that promote circulation, warming techniques, regulated emotional exposure in controlled—" "No." The word came sharp and immediate. "No emotional exposure. That's non-negotiable." "Lucas, you're dying because you feel nothing. Small, controlled exposure might weaken the binding enough to let the madness leak through." His eyes met hers, and for just a moment she saw real fear beneath the ice. "I've watched people go feral, Lainey. Seen them tear apart their own pack members, unable to stop. Felt my father's blood on my hands as he begged me to end him. I won't risk that, not for anything." The rawness in his voice, barely there but present, told her more than his words. He wasn't just afraid of feeling. He was terrified of becoming his father. "Then we find another way," Lainey said quietly. "There's always another way." Before Lucas could respond, Commander Thorne burst through the door, his scarred face tight with urgency. "Your Majesty, we have a situation." The situation was Lady Mira, one of the court's senior advisors, collapsed in the council chambers, with the same frost spreading across her skin. Lainey worked quickly, monitoring vital signs while Lucas stood rigid nearby, his expression carefully blank, but his hands clenched tight enough that his knuckles showed white. "It's the same pattern," Lainey said quietly, so only Lucas could hear. "The dark veins, the frost. She's not the anchor. Why would she?" "The binding is breaking," Lucas said flatly. "Leaking beyond me. I told you it was accelerating." Lady Mira's eyes fluttered open. "The cold," she whispered. "It's inside. I can't feel anything." Lainey administered warming compounds, wrapped her in thermal blankets, did everything her training demanded. But she could see the truth in Lucas's face. This wasn't going to stop with one person. By midday, 3 more court members had collapsed with the same symptoms. By evening, it was 7. All of them high-ranking, logical, emotionally controlled. The exact type the Hancock court valued most. It's targeting suppression, Laney realized, standing in the now crowded medical wing. The curse isn't just feeding on your emotional shutdown. It's spreading to others who've learned to feel nothing, like a contagion. Then the solution is obvious, Lord Perth said from his bed, his voice weak but certain. We maintain even stricter emotional discipline. If the curse targets feeling, we simply refuse to give it fuel. That's not, Laney started. The physician is correct, Lucas interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emotional control is what's kept the realm stable. We won't abandon that now. Laney stared at him. He was choosing the same path that was killing him, spreading it to his entire court. After the others slept, sedated for their own comfort, Laney cornered Lucas in the medical wing's preparation room. You're making it worse, she said without preamble. I'm maintaining the binding. You're feeding the curse exactly what it wants. Look at them, Lucas. Look at what suppression is doing. Better frozen than feral. Those aren't the only options. Laney's voice rose despite her efforts at control. You're so terrified of feeling that you can't see. There's a difference between destructive madness and healthy emotion. Lucas turned to face her fully, and something flickered behind his eyes. There and gone so fast she almost missed it. You talk to your plants, he said quietly. In the healing gardens. I've heard you. The observation caught her off guard. What? You talk to them. Tell them about your day. Apologize when you have to prune them. Thank them for growing. His head tilted slightly. You think I don't notice because I feel nothing. But I notice everything, Laney. Including the fact that you only show emotion to things that can't abandon you. The words struck like a blade between her ribs. Too accurate, too exposed. That's different, she managed. Is it? Lucas moved closer, and Laney caught the faint scent of winter that always clung to him. We're both terrified of the same thing. You're just better at hiding it. I'm not the one with a death curse spreading through my veins. No. You're just the one who's forgotten what it feels like to care about something that can hurt you back. He held her gaze. Tell me I'm wrong. Laney couldn't. Because he wasn't. The curse requires emotional vulnerability to break, Lucas said finally. I've known that since it began. But vulnerability means risk. Means potentially becoming what killed my father. Means opening doors I've kept locked for 8 years. He paused. I'd rather die frozen than live feral. Then you'll get your wish, Laney said quietly. Because at this rate, you have weeks, not months. She left him standing in the preparation room, surrounded by herbal compounds that couldn't cure what was really killing him. And for the first time in 3 years, Laney let herself feel the full weight of her fantasy, the desire to crack his walls, to make him feel again. She'd wanted to matter enough that he'd risk vulnerability. Now she understood the terrible price that risk demanded. By the 3rd day, 12 court members had fallen to the frost. Laney moved through the medical wing like a ghost, administering treatments that only delayed the inevitable. The dark veins spread slowly but steadily, creeping up necks and across faces, marking each victim as the curse consumed them from within. And through it all, Lucas remained standing, barely. She found him in the records chamber at midnight, surrounded by ancient texts that predated the feral wars. His hands trembled slightly as he turned pages, the first physical sign she'd seen that his control was slipping. "You should be resting," Laney said from the doorway. "I should be solving this." Lucas didn't look up. There has to be something we've missed. Some detail in the original binding ritual that... Lucas. She crossed to him, noting the new frost patterns spreading across his collarbone. "When did you last sleep?" "Sleep is irrelevant. Sleep is necessary. Your body is failing because I'm the anchor for a curse that's devouring my court." Now he did look up, and Laney saw exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Sleep won't fix that. Neither will working yourself to death. Laney reached for his wrist, checking his pulse by habit. Still too slow, still too cold. "At this rate, you'll collapse again before we find anything useful. Then I collapse." His tone remained flat, but his pulse jumped beneath her fingers, betraying the emotion he refused to show. "Better that than waste time on rest while my people freeze." Laney was about to argue when she noticed what he'd been reading. Not the feral binding texts. Something older. A journal written in faded ink, the pages brittle with age. "What is this?" she asked, pulling the book closer. "My father's private journal. From before." Lucas's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Before he went feral. Laney's breath caught. She'd never considered that Alpha King Marcus might have left records. Carefully, she began reading. The madness whispers constantly now. It promises freedom from restraint, power without consequence. Some days, I wonder if giving in wouldn't be easier than fighting. But I look at Lucas, my brilliant, sensitive son, and I know I must hold on. He feels too deeply. Always has. If I fall, he'll blame himself. And that kind of pain in someone who feels as much as he does, it would destroy him. "He knew," Laney whispered. "Your father knew what would happen. He knew he was going feral. He knew I'd have to kill him. And he knew..." Lucas stopped, something finally cracking in his carefully controlled voice. "He knew it would break me. That's why he wrote the next part." Laney turned the page, her hands unsteady. "If you're reading this, Lucas, then I'm gone, and you're the one who ended me. I'm sorry I made you carry that, but know this. Your ability to feel deeply isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing about you. Don't let my death teach you to shut down. The world needs kings who can feel and think. Promise me you won't become ice, just to avoid becoming fire." The words sat between them like an accusation. "He was wrong," Lucas said finally. "Feeling deeply is exactly what would make me dangerous. I can feel the madness sometimes, at the edges, waiting, wanting. If I let myself feel the way he did..." "You'd have warning," Laney interrupted, realization dawning. "Your father went feral because he felt everything and tried to suppress it. The pressure built until he snapped. But if you'd let yourself feel in controlled amounts, you'd recognize the difference between healthy emotion and destructive madness. Or I'd open the door just wide enough for the curse to slip through. You're already letting it through. Just slowly. Freezing instead of burning. But the end result is the same. You die. The binding breaks, and the madness returns anyway." Laney moved to stand directly in front of him. "Your father's last wish was for you not to become ice. You've spent 8 years doing exactly that." Lucas was silent for a long moment, his glacier blue eyes searching her face. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. "In 3 years, you've been nothing but professional, distant, safe. Why risk that now?" "Because I've fantasized about this for 3 years," Laney thought. "Because I want to matter enough that you'd feel for me. Because watching you die is worse than risking my own heart." "Because I'm your physician," she said instead. and good physicians don't let their patients kill themselves. Something shifted in Lucas's expression, so subtle she almost missed it. His eyes softened fractionally, a muscle in his jaw releasing tension she hadn't realized he was carrying. "You're lying," he said. But there was no accusation in it, just observation. "Your pulse just spiked. You do that when you're not being truthful." Laney's heart hammered. "Professional observation isn't. I notice everything about you, Laney." Lucas's voice dropped lower. "The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. How you touch the lavender plants in the healing garden when you're anxious. That you only make eye contact with me when you think I'm not looking back." He paused. "And I notice that right now, for the first time since we met, you're afraid. Not of the curse, of me knowing something." She should deflect, should retreat behind professional distance the way she always did. Instead, she watched something impossible happen. Lucas smiled. It was small, barely a curve of his lips, gone almost as soon as it appeared. But it was real. The first genuine expression she'd seen on his face in 3 years. "You feel something," he said, wonder bleeding into his carefully controlled tone. "For me, don't you?" Before Laney could answer, the door burst open. Commander Thorne stood there, his face pale. "Your Majesty, the frost. It's spreading beyond the castle. 3 villages reported cases this morning. Whatever this is..." "It's accelerating," Lucas finished, the smile vanishing as if it had never existed. But through some instinct, Laney didn't understand. She felt the ghost of it, felt his suppressed emotion like a physical presence in the room. And in that moment, she realized 2 terrifying truths. First, the pre-bond awareness was forming between them, whether they wanted it or not. Second, her fantasy of making him feel was becoming real, and it was going to kill them all. The emergency court session convened at dawn. Laney stood in the physician's gallery, a balcony overlooking the council chamber, where medical staff could observe but not participate. Below, court members who hadn't yet succumbed to the frost gathered around Lucas, their faces reflecting the same careful blankness their king had perfected. The Hancock court prided itself on logic. Emotion was for lesser packs, for alphas who couldn't control their instincts. Here, decisions were made through pure rational analysis. Laney had never hated that philosophy more than she did right now. 3 villages affected, Lord Caspian reported, his tone professionally detached despite the dark veins creeping up his neck. 47 documented cases, all exhibiting the same symptoms, emotional flattening followed by physical frost. "Quarantine protocols?" Lucas asked, his voice perfectly level. "Implemented. But Your Majesty..." Caspian hesitated. "The pattern is concerning. Every affected individual shares one trait: exceptional emotional control. The most disciplined members of each village, those who pride themselves on logic over feeling." "Then we know how to prevent spread," Lady Vex said from her seat. She was one of the few court members still unaffected, her sharp features showing no concern. "Mandate emotional suppression training across all territories. If the curse targets those who feel, we simply ensure no one does." Laney's hands clenched on the gallery railing. They were prescribing the exact behavior that fed the curse. "With respect, Lady Vex," Commander Thorne said carefully, "that approach may be counterproductive. The physician's research suggests..." "The physician," Vex interrupted, her gaze lifting to find Laney in the gallery, "has no authority in matters of realm security. This is a court decision." "The physician," Lucas said quietly, and something in his tone made the entire chamber go still, "has kept 12 of you alive when you should be dead. Her research is the only reason we understand the curse's pattern. Perhaps we should listen." The room rippled with surprise. The frozen king never defended anyone, never showed preference or partiality. The fact that he'd just done so for his physician was... Lainey felt the weight of every gaze in the chamber shift to her. "Your Majesty is generous," Lord Caspian said slowly. "But perhaps that generosity is itself concerning. The physician has been spending considerable time in your presence. Private consultations, late-night research sessions." He paused meaningfully. "One wonders if such proximity might be affecting your judgment." The implication hung in the air like poison. "Are you suggesting," Lucas said, his voice dropping to that dangerous register, "that I'm compromised?" "I'm suggesting that emotional attachment creates blind spots, and the physician is..." Caspian gestured vaguely. "Compelling. It would be understandable if you developed certain feelings." Lainey's wolf bristled at the dismissal, but beneath her anger, fear coiled tight. If the court believed Lucas was emotionally compromised, they'd remove him, execute him before the binding could break, find a new anchor who hadn't made the mistake of feeling. "The physician is professional and competent," Lucas said flatly. "Nothing more. Your concern is noted and dismissed." The words should have been relief. Instead, they hit Lainey like a slap, sharp and stinging and completely deserved. What had she expected? That he'd admit to the connection forming between them? That he'd risk everything to defend something that couldn't exist? "However," Lady Vex said, her eyes gleaming, "Lord Caspian raises a valid point. The curse is accelerating. We need to ensure our king remains focused. Perhaps the physician should be reassigned. For everyone's safety." "No." The word came before Lainey realized she'd spoken. Every eye in the chamber turned back to her. "I mean, Your Majesty is my patient. Reassigning me now would compromise his treatment." "Then assign a second physician," Vex suggested smoothly. "Someone to provide objective oversight. We have healers from the northern packs who are equally qualified and less familiar." The trap closed with elegant precision. Refuse, and they'd claim Lucas was attached. Accept, and Lainey would be pushed aside, unable to help, as the curse consumed him. "Lady Vex makes a reasonable suggestion," Lucas said, and Lainey's heart sank. "However, I decline. Physician Lainey has invested significant research into this curse. Bringing in someone new would waste time we don't have." He paused. "Unless the court wishes to formally question my judgment." The challenge was subtle, but clear. Question him now, and they'd have to move against him immediately, before they had a replacement anchor ready. The court exchanged glances. Finally, Vex inclined her head. "Your judgment stands, Your Majesty. For now." The session continued with logistical discussions, quarantine procedures, resource allocation, public messaging. But Lainey barely heard it. She was too focused on the way Lucas's hands had tightened on his throne's armrests when Caspian suggested removing her. Too aware of the emotions she'd felt, bleeding through that growing pre-bond awareness. Anger, fear, and underneath it all, something that felt dangerously close to possessiveness. After the session ended, Lainey tried to slip away quickly. She made it halfway down the corridor before Lucas's voice stopped her. "My chambers, now." Not a request. Lainey followed him through winding passages to his private quarters, a space she'd only entered once before, and only for emergency treatment. He shut the door behind them and leaned against it, some of his careful control finally cracking. "They're looking for weakness," he said. "Any excuse to remove me before the binding fails completely. I know, and they'll use you to find it." His eyes met hers, and Lainey saw the conflict in them, duty versus desire, logic versus feeling. "You should request reassignment. Volunteer for it before they force it." "Is that what you want?" What I want is irrelevant. That's not an answer. Lucas pushed off the door, crossing to stand directly in front of her. This close, Laney could see the new frost pattern spreading across his throat, could feel the cold radiating from his skin. "I can feel you," he said quietly. "Through the pre-bond, your emotions bleeding into mine. Anger at the court, fear for me. Something else you're trying very hard to hide." He paused. "It's the first thing I've felt in 8 years that isn't pain or cold or nothing at all. And it's going to get us both killed." "Then push it away," Laney whispered. "Shut it down the way you shut everything else down." "I've tried." Something almost like frustration crossed his face. "It's not working anymore. You're not working. Every time you're near, the walls crack a little more. Every time you look at me like you're doing right now, like I'm something worth saving instead of something to be afraid of, I feel it. And feeling is exactly what I can't afford. What if feeling is exactly what you need? Then the realm burns, and it's my fault. Again." Lucas's voice finally broke. Just slightly, just enough. "I killed my father to stop the madness. I won't become the reason it returns." Laney reached out slowly, placing her hand over his heart. Through their growing connection, she felt everything he was trying to suppress. Grief and guilt and desperate loneliness, and something bright and terrifying that felt like hope. "You're not your father," she said firmly. "And this isn't the same madness. How do you know?" "Because right now, you're feeling. And you're still you." Lucas stared at her, his chest rising and falling beneath her palm, his control visibly fracturing. Then his hand covered hers, pressing it more firmly against his heart. "Stay," he said. "I know I should send you away, should maintain distance, should follow every logical strategy that says this is wrong. But stay anyway." It wasn't a confession of love. It wasn't a promise. It was simply the truth, the first real feeling he'd allowed himself in 8 years. And Laney, who'd spent 3 years fantasizing about this moment, finally understood why it terrified her. Because making Lucas feel wasn't going to save him. It was going to force them both to risk everything. Laney stayed. For 5 days, she and Lucas worked in careful proximity, researching the curse, treating the affected, pretending the pre-bond wasn't strengthening between them with every shared glance and accidental touch. By the 6th day, Laney couldn't pretend anymore. She found him in the healing gardens at midnight, standing among her carefully tended plants, looking more lost than she'd ever seen him. The frost had spread further, now visible at his temples, creeping into his dark hair like premature silver. "You're killing yourself," she said quietly. "I'm maintaining the binding." Lucas didn't turn around. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Laney moved closer, her footsteps soft on the garden path. "Because from where I'm standing, they look exactly the same." "Then stop standing so close." But there was no command in his voice, just exhaustion. "Stop looking at me like you see something worth saving. Stop making me want—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "Want what?" "Things I can't have." He finally turned to face her, and Laney's breath caught at the raw emotion bleeding through his carefully controlled expression. "You think I don't know what you've been hiding? Your fantasy about breaking through my walls? Making the Frozen King feel again?" Heat flooded Laney's face. "I never—" "You didn't have to say it. I can feel it through the pre-bond. Every time you look at me. Every time your pulse races when I'm near. You've been fantasizing about this for years." His voice dropped. "About mattering enough that I'd risk vulnerability for you." The accusation hung between them, true and devastating. "Yes," Laney whispered, because lying seemed pointless now. "I have." Is that what you want to hear? That I've spent 3 years imagining what it would be like to see you feel something? To be the one person who could crack that ice? I want you to understand what you're asking. Lucas moved closer, and Lainey could feel the cold radiating from him. See the way frost crept further up his neck with each word. You want me to feel here. He grabbed her wrist, pressing her palm flat against his chest. Through the pre-bond and the physical contact, emotions slammed into Lainey like a tidal wave. Grief, raw and bottomless, for a father he'd had to kill. Guilt that ate at him constantly, convinced he'd failed somehow. Loneliness so profound, it felt like drowning. Fear that he'd become the monster he'd destroyed. And underneath it all, something else, bright and desperate, and directed entirely at her. Lainey gasped, her knees buckling under the weight of it. Lucas caught her, his arms coming around her instinctively. That's what you're asking me to feel. That's what I've been suppressing for 8 years. And if I let it loose, if I stop controlling it even for a moment, the binding breaks and the madness returns. Lucas, Lainey's voice shook. She could still feel his emotions bleeding through their connection, could feel the tremendous effort it took him to keep them contained. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. You thought feeling would save me. His laugh was bitter. You thought your fantasy would have a happy ending, where the ice cracks and the king becomes human again, and everything is fine. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. This is what happens when I feel, Lainey. This is why I chose ice. But you're dying. I've been dying for 8 years. At least this way, I die alone instead of taking the realm with me. The words hit like a blade between her ribs. You're not alone. You have me. You have a physician who fantasizes about breaking me? That's not comfort. That's torture. But his arms tightened around her anyway, contradicting his words. Because I want it too. I want to let go. Want to feel without fear. Want to... He stopped, breathing hard. Want to what? Lainey asked, even though she could feel the answer through their bond. Want you. The confession came out broken. I've wanted you since the first time you touched my wrist to check my pulse, and I realized your hands were the only warm thing in my entire world. I've wanted you through 3 years of pretending you were just my physician. I've wanted you through every moment of watching you talk to plants, because they're safer than people. His forehead pressed against hers. And wanting you is killing me faster than the curse ever could. Lainey's breath caught. This was the fantasy, the moment she'd imagined countless times. The ice cracking, the walls coming down, the frozen king finally feeling something. But reality was so much more complicated than fantasy. The curse feeds on suppressed emotion, she said quietly. Your father's journal said the madness came from feeling everything and trying to contain it. What if... She hesitated. What if the solution isn't suppression or explosion? What if it's balance? There is no balance. I either feel or I don't. No. You either feel everything or nothing. But there's a space between those extremes. Lainey pulled back to meet his eyes. What if you let yourself feel in small amounts? Controlled exposure. With me there to anchor you. To pull you back if it becomes too much. That's insane? Maybe. But it's better than freezing to death while pretending you're saving everyone. She placed her hand back over his heart. Your father's last wish was for you not to become ice. Let me help you honor that. Let me be the anchor you've needed all along. Lucas stared at her, conflict warring across his face. Through their bond, Lainey felt the moment he made his choice, felt the walls crack just a fraction wider. If this fails, he said quietly, If I lose control, then I'll stop you, the same way you stopped your father, with love instead of fear. Something shifted in Lucas's expression, not quite hope, but the beginning of it. You love me? It wasn't a question, but Lainey answered anyway. Yes, I've loved you since before I understood what that meant, since before I knew the cost. She smiled despite the tears burning her eyes. And I'm going to love you through whatever comes next, even if that means watching you learn how to feel again, even if it terrifies us both. Lucas's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. This is the most reckless thing I've ever done, he whispered. Good, Lainey said. It's about time the Frozen King learned how to be reckless. And in the healing gardens, surrounded by plants that grew because she'd let herself care for them, Lucas kissed her. It was tentative at first, as if he'd forgotten how. But then the pre-bond flared between them, emotions bleeding through in both directions, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and genuine. For the first time in 8 years, the Alpha King let himself feel, and the realm didn't end. Not yet. The frost spread to 20 villages overnight. Lainey woke in the healing gardens where she and Lucas had fallen asleep, still wrapped in each other's arms. For one perfect moment, she let herself believe the kiss had been enough, that one moment of vulnerability had begun healing what 8 years of suppression had broken. Then she felt the cold, not just from Lucas's skin, though he was ice against her. This was different, deeper. The air itself had gone winter-sharp, and when Lainey looked up, she saw frost spreading across the garden plants, like crystallized death. No, she whispered, pulling away from Lucas. No, no, no. Her lavender plants, the ones she talked to, the ones that had thrived under her care, were frozen solid. Every carefully tended herb, every flower she'd coaxed into bloom, turned to ice beneath her fingers. Lucas woke to find her kneeling in the frost, tears streaming down her face. Lainey! What did we do? She turned to him, grief and guilt warring in her chest. The curse. It's accelerating. Because you felt. Because I pushed you to. No. Lucas was on his feet, pulling her up with him. Through their bond, she felt his own horror mixing with determination. This isn't because I felt. It's because I've been suppressing for too long. The dam was already breaking. Last night just made it visible. But Commander Thorne's arrival minutes later contradicted that hope. Your Majesty, the frost reached the outer territories during the night. Entire villages frozen. We're looking at hundreds affected now and... He stopped, taking in the frozen garden. Lainey's tear-stained face, the way Lucas stood protectively close to her. What happened here? The curse is reaching critical mass, Lucas said flatly. Assemble the court. Emergency session. Now. The court chamber felt like a tomb. Every remaining member had gathered, their faces showing the same careful blankness. But Lainey could see the frost creeping up their necks, the dark veins pulsing beneath their skin. They were all dying, slowly, together. The situation is untenable, Lord Caspian stated, his voice weak but certain. The curse is consuming the realm. We need immediate action. Agreed, Lady Vex said. Her sharp eyes found Lucas. The question is what action? Your Majesty, you've been researching solutions for weeks. Surely you've found something. Lucas stood before them, and for the first time since Lainey had known him, he looked uncertain. There is one option. The curse feeds on suppressed emotion. The binding requires an anchor who feels nothing. Those two facts create an impossible paradox. Then we maintain stronger suppression, Caspian insisted. Mandatory emotional training across all territories. Won't work. Lainey's voice cut through the chamber. She stepped forward from her position in the gallery, ignoring the shocked stares. The curse is accelerating because of suppression. Every person affected shares one trait: exceptional emotional control. You're feeding it exactly what it wants. The physician oversteps, Vex said coldly. The physician is right. Lucas's voice carried absolute authority. I've spent 8 years being the perfect anchor, feeling nothing, maintaining perfect control. And in those 8 years, the curse has only grown stronger, because the binding was never meant to be maintained through complete emotional suppression. Then what was it meant for? Commander Thorne asked. Balance. Lucas met Lainey's eyes across the chamber. The feral wars happened because alphas felt everything with no control. The binding was meant to prevent that, not by eliminating feeling, but by teaching control alongside emotion. We were supposed to feel and think, not choose one or the other. That's philosophical speculation, Caspian protested. It's in my father's journal, in his final entry. Lucas's voice tightened. He wrote that the binding would fail if the anchor became as imbalanced as the feral alphas, just in the opposite direction. Ice instead of fire. But still madness. The chamber went silent. If what you're saying is true, Lady Vex said slowly, then maintaining you as anchor is actively destroying the realm. The solution would be execution, Caspian finished. Replace the anchor before the binding fails completely. Your Majesty, with all respect, if your continued existence threatens the realm, then I step down. Lucas's words fell like stones. I abdicate. You find a new anchor, someone who can maintain balance better than I have. No. Lainey was moving before she realized it, descending from the gallery to stand beside Lucas. There's another option. The binding requires balance. Lucas can't achieve that alone. 8 years proved that. But what if he wasn't alone? What are you suggesting? Vex asked. A mate bond? Lainey's voice strengthened despite her racing heart. Ancient texts describe mate bonds as emotional anchors, 2 people balancing each other. If Lucas bonds with someone who can help him maintain equilibrium, who can feel when he goes too cold, who can anchor him when emotion threatens to overwhelm. You're proposing yourself, Caspian said flatly. How convenient. I'm proposing a solution that doesn't require killing your king. Lainey turned to face the court directly. Yes, I'm suggesting myself. I'm his physician. I know his condition better than anyone, and... She hesitated only briefly. The pre-bond has already formed between us. We're halfway there. The chamber erupted. This is manipulation. The physician has compromised the king's judgment. An Omega cannot anchor a curse of this magnitude. Enough! Lucas's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The decision is mine, and I choose to try. He looked at Lainey, something vulnerable breaking through his controlled expression. If you're willing. Through their pre-bond, Lainey felt everything he wasn't saying. Fear that he'd destroy her. Hope that she could save him. Love that terrified him more than death. And underneath it all, desperate trust that she was strong enough for this. I'm willing, she said. Then you have 3 days, Lady Vex announced, her voice sharp. 3 days to complete the bond, and prove it stabilizes the curse. If the frost continues spreading, we execute the king and find a new anchor. Those are our terms. Agreed, Lucas said, before Lainey could protest the death sentence hidden in those words. As the court dispersed in clusters of heated whispers, Commander Thorne approached them quietly. Your Majesty, if this fails, I know. Lucas's hand found Lainey's, squeezing once. Prepare the succession protocols, just in case. Thorne nodded grimly and left. Alone in the emptying chamber, Lainey turned to Lucas. 3 days to complete a mate bond and break a curse that's been growing for 8 years. No pressure. I'm sorry, Lucas said quietly, for dragging you into this, for putting you at risk, for... Stop. Lainey placed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat too slowly beneath her palm. I walked into this with my eyes open. I chose you. Now let me help you choose yourself. What if I can't do it? Can't feel without losing control? Then I'll be there to catch you. She smiled despite her fear. That's what balance means, Lucas. You don't have to hold everything alone anymore. Through their bond, she felt his walls crack a little wider, fear and hope and love bleeding through in equal measure. They had 3 days to save the realm, and Lainey was terrified they'd need forever. The bonding chamber was older than the castle itself. Lainey stood at its center, surrounded by ancient symbols carved into stone, moon phases and pack hierarchies intertwined with something older, something that predated the feral wars. Lucas had explained that true mate bonds required sacred space, places where magic still remembered what it meant to connect, rather than control. Are you certain? Lucas asked from the doorway. He'd asked the same question 17 times in the past 2 days. Each time, his control had slipped a fraction more. Fear and hope and desperate love bleeding through their pre-bond. I've been certain since I kissed you in the healing gardens, Lainey said. The question is whether you're ready. I'll never be ready. He entered the chamber, closing the door behind him. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions. They'd spent 2 days preparing. Lainey researching bonding rituals, Lucas practicing emotional regulation with her as his anchor. Small exercises at first, letting himself feel gratitude without spiraling into guilt, experiencing brief moments of joy without immediately suppressing them. The frost had continued spreading, but slower, as if the curse itself was waiting to see what they'd choose. Now, on the 3rd day, with the court's deadline looming and half the realm frozen, they stood in the bonding chamber and faced the impossible. The ritual requires vulnerability, Lainey said, reciting what she'd learned. Complete honesty, no walls between us. I've had walls for 8 years. I'm not sure I remember how to exist without them. Then we'll figure it out together. Lainey crossed to him, taking his freezing hands in hers. Tell me something true, something you've never said out loud. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his glacier blue eyes searching her face. I'm terrified, he finally whispered. Not of dying, not of the curse. Of this, of letting you see everything I am and discovering it's not enough. That the love you think you feel will disappear when you understand what I've done, what I am. I already know what you've done. You killed your father to save the realm. You've spent 8 years dying slowly to protect others. You've carried impossible weight alone because you thought that's what strength meant. Lainey's grip tightened on his hands. And I love you more, not less, for all of it. Something cracked in Lucas's expression. Grief and relief tangled together. How? Because strength isn't pretending you don't hurt. It's hurting and choosing to keep going anyway. She pulled him closer. Now tell me something else. Something you want. I want... His voice broke. I want to stop being afraid. Want to feel without drowning. Want to believe I deserve this. Deserve you. You do. I killed my father. To save him from suffering. To protect your people. That's not murder, Lucas. That's mercy. Lainey placed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat too slowly. Your father's last wish was for you not to become ice. By bonding with me, by choosing to feel again, you're finally honoring that. Tears tracked down Lucas's face, the first she'd ever seen from him. Through their pre-bond, Lainey felt the dam breaking, 8 years of suppressed emotion, finally finding release. Grief for his father. Guilt that had eaten at him constantly. Loneliness so profound, it felt like drowning. But also, love. Fierce and desperate, and directed entirely at her. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "Then let me show you." Lainey rose on her toes, pressing her forehead to his. "Let yourself feel. All of it. I'll anchor you. I promise. What if I lose control? Then I'll remind you who you are." She smiled despite her own fear. "You're not your father, Lucas. You're not the feral alpha he became. You're the king who chose balance, who chose me. Who's brave enough to feel after 8 years of ice." Lucas's hands came up to cup her face, trembling slightly. "If this works, if we complete the bond, you'll feel everything I do. The grief, the guilt, the darkness. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared for you. All of you." The words seemed to unlock something in him. Lucas kissed her, not tentative like in the garden, but with 8 years of suppressed want finally given permission. Lainey kissed him back, pouring her own emotions through their connection, love and certainty and unshakable trust. The pre-bond flared between them, strengthening. "The ritual requires acceptance," Lainey whispered against his lips, "of ourselves and each other, all the broken pieces, all the fear." "I accept you," Lucas said, "your strength, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to let me die alone." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "Your fantasy about breaking my walls, I accept all of it." "I accept you," Lainey echoed. "Your grief, your guilt, your desperate need for control, your fear of becoming what you destroyed." She met his eyes. "Your love that terrifies you. I accept all of it." The bond snapped into place, not gradually, not gently, but with the force of 8 years of denied connection finally finding completion. Lainey gasped as Lucas's emotions flooded through her, grief and love and desperate hope crashing over her in waves. But instead of drowning, she found herself anchored, held steady by the certainty of their choice. Through the bond, she felt Lucas experience the same revelation, her emotions bleeding into his, love without fear, trust without condition, strength that came from vulnerability rather than suppression, balance. For the first time in 8 years, Lucas felt everything, and didn't lose himself to it. The frost began to recede. It started with Lucas's skin, color returning to his too pale face, warmth bleeding back into hands that had been ice. The dark veins pulsed once, twice, then faded like shadows burned away by light. Through their bond, Lainey felt the curse's grip loosening. Not because Lucas had stopped feeling, but because he'd finally achieved what the binding had always required. Emotion balanced with control, feeling tempered by thought. Ice melting into something warmer, stronger, human. Lucas collapsed into her arms, 8 years of exhaustion finally claiming him. But through their bond, Lainey felt no fear, only peace, the kind that came from finally being seen completely and loved anyway. "I feel you," he whispered. "Everything. It's terrifying." "Good," Lainey said, holding him tighter. "That means you're alive." Outside the bonding chamber, frost stopped spreading across the realm. In the villages, the frozen began to thaw. In the castle, court members woke from their ice-induced sleep, confusion giving way to wonder. The curse was breaking, not through suppression or explosion, but through balance. And in the sacred chamber, 2 people who'd spent years afraid of feeling finally learned what it meant to be whole. Together. The court convened at sunset to witness what no one had believed possible. Lainey stood beside Lucas in the grand hall, their bond humming with shared strength. The frost that had marked him for 8 years was gone. his skin warm, his eyes bright with emotions he no longer had to hide. Around them, the affected were recovering. Not instantly, but steadily. The dark veins fading, the cold receding, life returning to bodies that had been slowly freezing to death. Impossible, Lord Caspian breathed, staring at his own hands where the frost had vanished. The binding should have broken. The madness should have returned. The binding didn't break, Lucas said, his voice carrying a warmth it had lacked for 8 years. It evolved. The curse was never meant to be maintained through complete suppression. It required balance, feeling and control existing together. And the Omega provides that balance? Lady Vex asked, her sharp eyes assessing Laney with new calculation. My mate provides that balance, Lucas corrected, emphasis on the word. Just as I provide balance for her. That's what true mate bonds do. They don't eliminate individual strength, they multiply it. Through their bond, Laney felt his certainty, and underneath, his wonder that this was real, that he could feel without fear, that 8 years of ice had finally melted into something sustainable. The villages are recovering, Commander Thorne reported, entering the hall. Initial reports show the frost receding across all affected territories. Whatever you did... He looked between Lucas and Laney, understanding dawning. It worked. Not whatever we did, Lucas said quietly. What we chose. To risk vulnerability instead of dying slowly in isolation. He turned to address the full court. For 8 years, this realm has valued emotional suppression above all else. Logic over feeling. Control over connection. And that philosophy nearly destroyed us. You're suggesting we abandon the principles that kept us stable after the Feral Wars? Caspian's voice held disbelief. I'm suggesting we learn from our mistakes. Lucas's hand found Laney's, their fingers intertwining naturally. The Feral Wars happened because Alphas felt everything with no control. We responded by eliminating feeling entirely. Both extremes are forms of madness. The solution isn't choosing one or the other. It's finding balance between them. That's philosophical idealism, Lady Vex said carefully. Difficult to codify into law. Then we start small. Laney spoke up, feeling Lucas's support through their bond. We stop punishing emotion, stop treating feelings as weakness, teach control alongside emotional intelligence instead of suppression. The Omega speaks boldly, Vex observed, though I suppose as the king's mate she has earned that right. She speaks as my equal, Lucas corrected firmly, and as the person who saved this realm when logic alone would have killed it. His eyes swept the chamber. The curse targeted our greatest strength, emotional control, and turned it into our fatal weakness. Physician Laney recognized what I'd been too afraid to see. That feeling isn't the enemy. Fear of feeling is. The court exchanged glances, some skeptical, others thoughtfully considering. What you're proposing would require restructuring our entire philosophical foundation, Caspian said slowly. The laws, the training protocols, the way we govern. Yes, Lucas agreed. It will take time, effort, willingness to admit we were wrong, but the alternative is returning to the same suppression that nearly destroyed us. He paused. I'm done choosing ice over life. This realm can evolve with me, or find a new king. The ultimatum hung in the air. Finally, Lady Vex inclined her head. The curse is broken. The king is stable. The realm is recovering. It would be unwise to challenge such clear success. Her lips curved slightly. Though I suspect this new philosophy will face resistance from traditional packs. Then we address resistance with patience and proof, Laney said. Show them that balance works better than either extreme. The physician... Vex caught herself. The Queen Speaks Wisely. The title sent ripples through the hall. Queen, not by political arrangement or council approval, but by genuine mate bond, by choice. Through their bond, Lainey felt Lucas's surge of pride, and deeper, his gratitude that she'd chosen this path, chosen him, chosen to risk everything for a chance at balance. "There is one more matter," Commander Thorne said. "The bonding was unconventional. Completed under duress, some might argue. The court should formally recognize—" "The bond is recognized," Lucas interrupted. "By ancient law, by the breaking of the curse, by every witness who saw frost recede when we completed it. Anyone who questions its validity questions my judgment." Another challenge. This one met with silence. "Then let it be recorded," Lady Vex announced. "King Lucas and Queen Lainey, bonded by choice and proven by deed. May their balance guide the realm forward." The formal recognition settled over them like a mantle. Lainey felt the weight of it, not crushing, but grounding. She was queen now, not invisible, not safe, but chosen and choosing in return. That evening they returned to the healing gardens. The plants Lainey had thought frozen forever were recovering. New growth pushing through frost-damaged stems. Lavender beginning to bloom again despite the season. "They're resilient," Lucas observed, kneeling beside a partially recovered herb bed. "Stronger than they look." "Like their caretaker," Lainey said, settling beside him. "Like both of us." He met her eyes, and she saw everything in his gaze. Love and wonder, and the kind of peace that came from finally being whole. "I spent 8 years convinced that feeling would destroy me. You taught me it could save me instead. We saved each other." Lainey leaned against his shoulder, feeling his warmth through their bond. "You taught me that caring doesn't have to mean losing, that some things are worth the risk of pain." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the gardens heal, feeling their bond settle into something sustainable and strong. "What happens now?" Lainey asked eventually. "Now we figure out how to rule together, how to teach a realm to embrace balance instead of extremes, how to prove that feeling and thinking can coexist." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. "And we do it without ice or walls or fear." "Sounds terrifying." "It is." He smiled, that genuine expression that had been missing for 8 years. "But for the first time since I took this crown, I'm not facing it alone." Through their bond, Lainey felt his absolute certainty, his love, his commitment to building something better than what they'd inherited. The frozen king had finally thawed, and in melting, he'd discovered something stronger than ice could ever be. Balance, partnership, love earned through choice and sustained through trust. The realm would learn. One careful, feeling step at a time. 6 months after the curse broke, Lainey woke to sunlight streaming through the royal chambers, and Lucas's emotions humming contentedly through their bond. No fear, no cold, just warmth and peace, and the gentle awareness of being completely known and completely loved. "You're thinking loudly again," Lucas murmured against her shoulder, his voice rough with sleep. "I'm not thinking anything." "Liar." He propped himself up on one elbow, glacier blue eyes warm with amusement. "I can feel you cataloging medical supplies through the bond, on our rest day. Again. The new healing center needs you to stop working for 5 minutes and just exist." Lucas's fingers traced idle patterns on her arm. "Remember existing? That thing we promised we'd try?" Lainey smiled despite herself. 6 months of the bond, and she was still learning how to let herself rest, how to care without drowning in responsibility, how to be queen and physician and simply herself, all at once. "How's it feel?" she asked, deflecting. "The balance?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, genuinely considering. Through their bond, Laney felt him taking inventory, emotions present but manageable, control maintained without suppression, the careful equilibrium they'd built together. "Like breathing," he said finally. "Natural, sustainable." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Some days are harder than others. Yesterday I felt my father's absence so acutely, I thought the grief would break me. But you were there, anchoring me, reminding me that feeling grief doesn't mean drowning in it. And some days, I still want to hide in the gardens and talk to plants, because people are terrifying," Laney admitted. "But you're there, reminding me that caring about things that can hurt me is worth the risk." "Balance," Lucas said softly. "Balance," she agreed. A knock interrupted them, gentle but insistent. "Your Majesties," Commander Thorne called through the door. "The delegation from the Northern Pax has arrived early. They're asking specifically for the Queen." Laney felt Lucas's surge of pride through the bond. No jealousy, no possessiveness, just genuine satisfaction that she'd become so essential to the realm's governance. "Tell them I'll be there within the hour," Laney called back. After Thorne's footsteps faded, Lucas helped her dress. A casual intimacy they developed, hands working together with practiced ease. The crown she wore now was lighter than his, delicate silver worked with moonstone, but no less significant. "The Northern Pax want to implement the emotional intelligence training," Lucas said as they prepared. "Third territory this month to request it." "Progress," Laney said. "Slow, but real." The realm was changing. Not overnight, but steadily. Pax learning that emotional awareness didn't mean losing control, that feeling could coexist with strength, that the Feral War's lessons didn't require eliminating emotion entirely. Some resisted. Traditional alphas who clung to the old ways, who saw vulnerability as weakness. But more were watching Lucas and Laney, watching how their bond had saved the realm, how balance had succeeded where extremes had failed, and choosing to evolve. The delegation meeting went well. Laney presented the training protocols she'd developed with Lucas's input, exercises in emotional regulation that didn't require suppression, techniques for recognizing healthy feeling versus destructive spiraling. "The Queen has a gift for this," the Northern Pack representative said, "for making emotion feel safe instead of dangerous." "Because it can be both," Laney replied. "The key is learning which is which, and having people who can help you navigate the difference." Her eyes found Lucas's across the council chamber. Through their bond, she felt his support, his love, his absolute certainty that she belonged exactly where she was. After the delegation departed, they walked through the healing gardens together. A routine they'd established, time carved out each day for just them. The gardens had fully recovered. More than recovered. They thrived now, tended by both Laney and Lucas. He'd discovered he enjoyed the quiet work of nurturing growth, the patience required to coax life from soil. "I never imagined this," Lucas said, kneeling beside a lavender bed. 6 months ago I was convinced I'd die frozen and alone. Now you're alive," Laney finished, settling beside him. "Feeling, growing, learning that ice wasn't strength. It was just fear in disguise. You taught me that." He turned to face her fully. "You and your stubborn fantasy about making me feel again, your refusal to let me die quietly. Your absolute certainty that I was worth saving, even when I'd given up on myself." "You saved yourself," Laney corrected gently. "I just gave you permission to try. We saved each other." Lucas's hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with the tenderness he no longer feared showing. "You taught me to feel. I taught you to trust. Together we learned that balance isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing we could build." Through their bond, Lainey felt the absolute truth of his words. They had balanced each other, his control tempering her fear, her emotion thawing his ice, both of them becoming more together than they'd ever been alone. "The court asked me yesterday if I regretted it," Lainey said quietly. "Bonding with you, taking on the weight of being queen, becoming visible when I'd spent so long hiding. And I told them the truth," she smiled, "that my fantasy wasn't about breaking you. It was about being important enough to someone that they'd choose vulnerability, choose to feel, choose me." She leaned into his touch. "You chose me, Lucas, every day, even when it terrifies you, especially when it terrifies you. You make it worth the fear," he said simply. They sat in the healing gardens as sunset painted the sky gold and amber, two people who'd spent years afraid of feeling finally at peace with it. The realm stretched around them, healing, evolving, learning slowly that strength came in many forms. The frozen king had thawed completely, and in place of ice, he'd found something infinitely more powerful: love that didn't demand perfection, partnership that celebrated balance, and the courage to feel everything without fear of drowning. Because he wasn't alone anymore. Neither of them were. "I kept my fantasy hidden for 3 years," Lainey said softly, "afraid it would destroy you if you knew." "And instead," Lucas said, pressing his forehead to hers, "it saved us both." The gardens bloomed around them, resilient and thriving, tended by hands that had learned the difference between control and care, between suppression and healthy boundary, between ice and warmth. She had once fantasized about making the frozen king feel. She'd never imagined that in teaching him to thaw, she'd learn to bloom. But that was the thing about balance. It transformed both sides equally. The realm had learned that lesson through watching its king and queen choose vulnerability over isolation, emotion over numbness, connection over control. And in learning, it had become something better than what fear had built. Warmer, stronger, human. The end. They said the Alpha King felt nothing, but she taught him that feeling everything, the grief, the joy, the terrifying love, was the only way to truly live. And in learning to feel, he showed her that caring didn't have to mean losing. Some fantasies, when spoken aloud, don't destroy. They heal. If this story touched your heart, drop a comment below and let me know which moment resonated most. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales, where ice melts into something warmer, and love is always worth the risk of feeling.